Now we get to the next part. False requirements. That's also, somebody said, and I forgot who, I think it was Brooks, but I can't find the reference, said that a requirement, a real user requirement, can only be a user requirement if the user can notice the difference. Right? For instance, one patient, one medical record. If they say, if you notice the difference or not does not determine if it's a requirement. But if you don't notice the difference, it certainly is not a requirement. So it's a necessary but not sufficient condition, if I want to express it that way. One patient, one medical record is what everybody's screaming about all the time. That's a solution, that's not a requirement. What is the requirement? The requirement can't be one medical record. That's stupid. Nobody gets healthier because they have one medical record, yes?
Where did you find that this is a requirement?
Because it's usually referred to as a requirement. The government in Sweden says it's a requirement. Every patient should have one medical record. That is what the current minister is saying. That's a requirement.
I've never heard of it.
Read the papers.
Well, I actually do, as a matter of fact.
That's what Hutt said.
Sorry?
Hutt said that it was her latest, one medical record. And then somebody said, yeah, it's not exactly what she said, but enough people are saying that, yeah. And also the actual request for proposal that went out, both in Uppsala and in Stockholm and in most other places, request for bids, actually contained, yes, this is for one common medical record for every patient. That's how the purchasing was done in most counties in Sweden. So it's most definitely a requirement, yeah. Which it shouldn't be. Because if you ask, yeah, but why? What you want to achieve with that, you don't get an answer. But the thing that you want to achieve should be the requirement. What is the requirement? The requirement is that the doctor should have all the relevant information about the patient at his fingertips as the patient is there. Yes, that could be a requirement, even though I have my issues with that too. And a solution for that requirement could be a common medical record. Right? But it's not the requirement. The requirement must be that the information is accessible. Right? If you take another one that's much more clear, common database. That can't be a requirement. Because if I sit and work with a patient and I see his information, there is no way, except for hacking, which I like to do, to find out if all this stuff is in one common database or not. I can't know that. So how can it be a requirement? It can't be a requirement. And still, it's posted as a requirement everywhere. You can't sell the system to the counters if it's not a common database because it's a requirement. You could even go as far as say, but maybe it's a requirement because of the IT management. They say, well, it must be a common database, otherwise it's too difficult. But even then it's not a requirement, because then the requirement would be, well, it should not be more difficult than this to manage. And then the solution could be, yeah, well, it's a common database, so it's easier to manage, which is not even true. But anyway. So that's another typical false requirement. Another one is terminology systems, where they say the electronic healthcare record must be built up from a standard terminology system. That can't be... in this case, you do notice the difference, to your horror, because it's almost impossible to work with anything like that. But it can't be a requirement because it doesn't solve anything. What is the need that you solve with the terminology system? And even if there is a need that you solve, it's a solution. Right? And what we just did in the beginning was trying to find out what they want to do with electronic healthcare records. And at least I came to the conclusion, maintain the information and present them to the human. There is nothing the machine can do today with this information that we can't do better ourselves. I was just checking something if I'm going to talk about it now or not. No, it's later. Okay. Somebody has any idea about false requirements and so forth? Real requirements? How do you get real requirements? As it looks.
All these are based on the LOU, aren't they?
The requirements are not based on the LOU, but they stipulate the requirements because of the LOU. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. But
Patients are a part of requirement.
what?
Patients.
Patients.
You have patients.
That the patient should have a say in the requirements. Is that what?
Having no patient, having no medical.
Having no patient. Yeah, well, the problem is here to find real requirements is really difficult. Right? It seems to be really difficult. And I heard from Vasilis that you're going to have a course about that later. And I think that's very important. Now, I've been both on the side of the user, I've been on the side of the producer, and I've also been on the side of the requirements collector of these things. And in Belgium, I worked for the largest organization doing these systems, and I was put in charge of a user focus group containing a lot of doctors having all kinds of it. And they gathered about once a month around a big table. And then they were sitting all these doctors saying, yeah, we want this feature, we want that feature, we want that feature. And before me, it was a professor of IT, by the way, who was coordinating this group. And they took careful notes of everything the doctor said. And they tried to implement this, and it was a bloody disaster.
I think the requirements are not in a general level. For example, storage is a requirement. Because
No, it's not.
storing anyway.
It's not really a good requirement, because a good requirement would be telling me what the utility of it was. If you say that the requirement is make it easy for the doctor to avoid making the same mistakes with the patient as before, then the maintenance of a correct history would be a solution. But maintenance of a patient history cannot be a requirement because it doesn't do anything. It's a method. It's not a goal in itself. So don't take it for granted that the patient history is useful. As I told you, when I see a patient in the emergency ward, everybody's saying we have to have the patient's history. I'm telling you, it makes very little difference. Because if the patient has a hole in his head, I don't need to read about that he didn't have that yesterday. You see what I mean? So there are situations where it's relevant, but they are much less than people talk about. If you say the requirement is to avoid delay in discovering this or that and so forth, then yeah, then you're at the right level of requirement, because that is noticeable in the requirement should be so wide, so high level, that it would be reasonable for me to ask, yeah, but do we need a computer for that? If you've already gone into the computer system with your requirement and telling me what the computer system should do, you already went into a solution. Because a requirement is good if I can say, okay, forget it, we do this little stickers, like for the allergies. The requirement today is the electronic healthcare system should have a warning for penicillin allergies if a patient has that. No, it shouldn't. The requirement is the doctor at the place should have an easy and fail-safe method of knowing if the patient has the penicillin allergy or not. Has nothing to do with computers. And I'd say the best solution is probably tattooing it on his forehead. You won't miss it unless he has a hole in his forehead. Right? So, and the solution we used to have with these little cards in the wallet are actually pretty good. No bracelets. Or like for anticoagulants, they have this thing around the neck, like a tag, a dog tag. It's called a dog tag. Don't laugh. That's the name for it. What did I think? Yeah, so that's the level you should get requirements. And about the worst thing you could ever do, believe me, is taking a number of doctors, put them around the table and ask them to tell you how a system should work. You will get such fairy tales that you would not believe it. I told you I headed one of these groups, and took me 2 meetings to destroy the group totally. We disbanded it. Because what I did was simply this. The doctor say, I want this, this and this and this, and the patient comes in, I want to do that. And I say, okay, fine. I tell them, yeah, well, then another patient comes in like this and says, oh, crap. Eh? And then I destroy their arguments one by one. And the thing is, if you take a doctor out of the water and put him on dry land at the table, he's going to tell you about exactly the problems he had the last week with these patients. I think it would be neat if my machine could do that. He talks optimistically. He never looks for the failures of his idea.